Now you believe the dial has magical powers?
I don't believe in magic, Wombat. I don't believe in magic, Wombat. I don't believe in magic, Wombat.
Are you sure about that?
There's something poetically tasteless about an evil organization resurrecting yet another beloved franchise from the grave, about the adventures of a man who goes to great lengths to preserve relics of the past by stopping evil organizations from digging up said relics to use for their personal gain. It wasn't enough for Indiana Jones to remain a cultural artifact, to be enshrined and appreciated as a character who embodies the ideals, morals, and values of a bygone era. As someone who fought for maintaining antiquity and the natural order of the world rather than for material or selfish ambition. Like every other property in Disney Lucasfilm's possession, the franchise must be recontextualized and modernized for a quick buck. Dial of Destiny is merely a symptom of the greater issue plaguing Lucasfilm, their inability to learn from their mistakes and their eagerness to double down on them. Everyone was well aware that this simply wasn't a story that needed to be told. After all, Indy already had his sunset ending, both literally and metaphorically. Though none of that stopped them from dragging an elderly version of the character kicking and screaming into a storyline completely devoid of all the charm, wit, and greater mythos that cemented the trilogy as a cornerstone of traditional filmmaking. It is instead supplanted with a miserable overtone that haunts Indy throughout the entire plot, all while attempting to bolster utterly reprehensible new side characters who constantly make jabs at his legacy and overall competence. It's beyond apparent that this film has no reverence or remote appreciation for anything that's come before it, because the vast majority of Dial of Destiny is wildly detached from anything established within the mainline series, and what little is carried over gets repeatedly spat upon, so much to the point where I'd wish those elements had been left out for the better. However, the film tries to briefly mask all of that by starting things off with a digital recreation of a younger Indiana Jones. Because it wasn't enough to use all that de-aging tech on Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, they had to awkwardly slap it into this scene just to give Indy all the personality of a plastic bag floating across a Walmart parking lot and the silky smooth voice of an 80-year-old geriatric.
You got a lot of nice stuff. Other people's stuff.
Disgusting!
I mean, seriously, I don't think I've ever experienced a more severe case of whiplash in my life. I'm sure there are plenty of people who will have clapped after seeing a young skinwalker version of Harrison Ford blankly stare around the screen and spout off throwaway dialogue. But all of this is just another instance of modern-day Lucasfilm trying to emulate aspects of a franchise that they don't truly understand. You can't recreate the same magic of Indy from the original trilogy, reacting to tense or dramatic situations in the actual moment, by just copy-pasting an artificial reconstruction onto an elderly Harrison Ford in order to sell that same type of performance. Or even worse, trying to do that very thing by drowning out a body double's face to extend the shelf life of a franchise indefinitely. Being able to de-age Harrison Ford to this extent is impressive on a technical level, but rather shallow and flimsy when put into action. Though after uncovering that CG Indy is an American spy, Officer Dipshit orders the other soldiers to take him to the top of a tower and have him hanged, rather than torturing him for information.
Not a great plan.
The film goes as far to establish that all this is taking place during the tail end of World War II. Berlin has effectively been reduced to rubble and Hitler is in hiding. Why would an SS officer not even bother to potentially pry crucial information from a US spy in the hopes of turning the tides of the war back in their favor? Or if nothing else, just choose to have him executed on the spot immediately. Of course, it's rather obvious as to why this officer has chosen to make CG Indy's death as elaborate as possible. It's because the writers wrote themselves into a corner and couldn't have the most likely result taking place because it would completely block off the direction they're wanting to take the story in. So Indy is then taken to the top floor, and as he's in the middle of suffocating, an Allied bomb suddenly drops through the roof, somehow doesn't end up going off immediately, only to fall through all of the floors of the building and manages to kill everyone in the room except for Indy. This then gives him just enough time and opportunity to slip off the noose before the gargoyle that was previously supporting the rope falls down into the pit.
Holy mommy fucking shit!
Yes, a bomb miraculously saving Indiana Jones from hanging to death might not technically be as stupid as the nuke fridge scene, but it is pretty damn close. On top of the fact that the writers tried to cram in a Rube Goldberg machine of bullshit in order to add a level of suspense, but all of this just rings incredibly hollow because anyone who's been alive on this planet for longer than 5 minutes knows that he has to survive all of this. There's an elderly Harrison Ford plastered front and center on the movie poster, for Christ's sakes. Make no mistake, the Indiana Jones films absolutely do have flaws, substantial ones at times, but they still offer compelling moments throughout to buy that investment and goodwill back from the viewer. Whereas Dial of Destiny insists that there's nothing worthwhile about Indy or his life work until it randomly changes its mind at the 11th hour. But I'll touch more on that later. However, it's established that the Germans are in possession of the Spear of Longinus and are loading it on a train to be shipped back to Berlin. A bizarre decision, since the film makes it clear straight out of the gate that the Allies are on the brink of taking the city if they haven't done so already.
Berlin's in rubble. The Fuhrer's in hiding. You lost.
You could argue that Indy was lying his ass off, but then again, why would he lie about something so easily verifiable as the current state of the Second World War? That scene heavily implies that this officer knows that what he's saying is true, but orders him away out of spite. Why take the risk of having the relic that Hitler has supposedly been searching for potentially fall into Allied hands? I'm sure there are already a bunch of you furiously typing away that this entire point is just a simple nitpick. But in reality, it's yet another glaring example of our generic side antagonist's pure incompetence. Some of the most iconic and captivating moments throughout the entire trilogy are a result of having our villains on screen use their cunning to turn the tables on Indy in their pursuit of achieving their end goal, either through coercion or betrayal. Indy as a character is bolstered not just by the heroic and virtuous qualities he displays in the face of seemingly impossible odds, but also by the nature of how he's landed in the very circumstance that he's currently in, which heavily contrasts with Dial of Destiny, because the film more or less has a checklist of mandated plot beats and action sequences that need to happen, but it never bothers to take the time or the effort to properly set those pieces into place. Though at the very least, we now know what it is that Indy is after. So he puts on a Nazi disguise and decides to hijack a nearby vehicle, which might not seem like the most brain-dead thing of him to do, until you quickly remember that Indy's main goal is recovering the spear. So why in the burger-flipping fuck did he not just board the train? And I guess both these guys didn't spot Indy knocking this driver's lights out, or notice the dude lying unconscious right outside the car they were getting into? The writers basically decided to hold this film at gunpoint just so they could shoehorn comedic relief and terribly drawn-out CGI chase sequences in the desperate attempt to portray a younger Indiana Jones performing incredible feats. But this entire string of events heavily relies on CG Indy refusing to make the most blatantly sensible decision at his disposal. On top of the fact that all the stunts and action taking place involving Indy is merely just a poor imitation of the actual thing. But once aboard the train, we get a brief exchange between CG Indy and a couple of soldiers.
Stehen bleiben.
You the most, you the second most, and you're useless.
This really applies to the entire train sequence, really, but it's very convenient for Indy that the Germans entirely forgot that they have guns and can just shoot the window out to unlock the door. Why they would hesitate to do that is pretty unclear, since these guards were originally tasked with guarding the artifact that Indy is now running off with. Though the soldier's sheer stupidity buys him just enough time to look over the spear, only for the movie to reveal
It's a fake.
Now, it would make sense why Indy would be able to decipher that the spear is a fake, because antiquities and archaeology is his line of work. After all, there's a strong likelihood that he's laid eyes on the real thing prior to this moment. But it's a little weird that Voller would have made that same discovery, considering that he is a physicist and admits that he only got a brief look at it.
Ich habe sie mir noch mal angesehen. Ich weiß, ich bin ausgebildeter Physiker. Wie aus?
Gottes Willen, Mann, spucken Sie es aus!
Not exactly the best qualifiers to use when making a definitive claim about something entirely outside of your field of study. But we're then introduced to the actual MacGuffin of this film, the Anti-Kythera. Not the rusty piece of metal found at the bottom of the ocean. This Anti-Kythera mechanism has been broken up into two parts and is somehow capable of time travel instead of predicting astronomical positions and eclipses.
Crap, mega crap.
The entire premise of the Indiana Jones trilogy is that it's a mystery adventure series entertaining the prospect of the supernatural by chasing after relics with some form of greater mythos or folklore attached to them. The Ark of the Covenant, the blood of CaLlEd, the Holy Grail. All of these artifacts or symbols presented in their respective films have some form of cultural significance due to being tied to, or being loosely associated with actual belief systems. The crux issue with trying to replace the Spear of Destiny as a MacGuffin is that while the Antikythera is a real historical artifact, the film ultimately has to resort to creating an entire mythos around something that people, broadly speaking, have never held any fantastical belief over. Which is only further compounded by the issue of the time travel mechanics presented in Dial of Destiny being completely stripped of any mystery or mysticism. The Antikythera is simply a mechanism of pure mathematics with a now definitive inventor, but yet the film still expects its characters, and even the audience, to treat the dial as mysterious supernatural MacGuffin. No matter how you slice it, all of this just fundamentally clashes with the format of an Indiana Jones film. Speaking of which, as Indy is making his way through the train, one of the guards ends up pulling the alarm. Though for some bizarre reason it only goes off at the back and the front of the train, but not in the car where the majority of all the German soldiers are.
Man, this is some bullshit!
Yeah, the amount of times Indy gets saved by wildly contrived bullshit throughout the course of this movie is pretty insane. Had any of the Nazis on board this train not been a paint-huffing moron, or had the officers ordered the people in the mess hall to search for Indy, or had there not conveniently been a crowd of soldiers for him to blend in with, CG Indy would have been totally screwed and most likely killed on the spot. However, he miraculously manages to make his way towards the front of the train and rescues his friend Basil. Because I guess none of them entertained the idea that the person that they just recently kidnapped might try to fucking escape, and that they should probably leave a couple of guards to keep tabs on him. I know the writers insist on giving all the villains in this film room temperature IQs, but this is something so astoundingly basic that you'd have to actively go out of your way to screw up. Though we then get an interesting exchange between CG Indy and Basil.
I thought I told you to stay in the woods, Baz.
What sort of a man hides in a hedge while his friend is facing death?
Except that's absolutely what you did. You ran away in the woods while your friend was about to be executed, and you still managed to get captured in the process. Fantastic work there, Basil. But Indy then proceeds to knock out Mads Mikkelsen, which causes him to drop his half of the Antikythera. That may seem like nothing on face value, but it's actually the sole reason for why Indy and Basil were able to prevent our main villain from enacting his crazy time travel scheme for over 20 years. And unfortunately, Voller losing in anticlimactic fashion is very much a recurring trend throughout the entire film, which is quite the shame because I think Mads Mikkelsen is definitely well suited, and without question, perfectly capable of portraying an imposing Indiana Jones antagonist, had the writers actually given him anything worthwhile for his character. But regardless, as CG Indy and Basil make their way further along, they come across someone manning an AA gun. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier, but apparently this train has been under aerial bombardment this entire time, and none of the other soldiers are even remotely concerned that they're under attack by enemy aircraft. One of the officers even makes the galaxy-brain decision to order his troops to start climbing the outside of the train while they're currently being shot at by Allied fighters. You know, I'm starting to get the sneaky suspicion that the film needed to have the goons chasing Indy do something so wildly incompetent in order for a certain plot beat to take place.
Don't do drugs. If you're doing it, stop it. Get some help.
Seeing as they narrowly escaped getting turned into a cloud of red mist by the skin of their teeth, you'd assume that CG Indy and Basil would be actively trying to get off the train by now. But that would be an instance of our characters doing something that makes sense, which is a luxury that Disney Lucasfilm can't afford now, apparently. So, the both of them then decide to climb on top of the train, only to get cut off by Officer Dipshit, who is holding the fake Spear of Destiny despite having been told directly to his face that it's a fake.
We were looking for it.
Why? Because of its power?
It has no power.
Why would you not just pull your gun out on them that you clearly have, you sidewalk-licking troglodyte? Though let's entertain this idea that for some asinine reason he genuinely did believe that the spear was real. It would make more sense for him to try and escape with it rather than trying to duke it out with Indy. If this artifact was crucial to Hitler's plan for turning the tide of war in their favor, then there would be zero reason for him to risk having it fall into Allied hands, especially in the face of overwhelming and certain defeat. But nah, screw all that, we need to have our discount CGI Last Crusade train fight. So after Officer Dipshit gets killed off, the most remarkably retarded reason possible, Mads Mikkelsen shows up and has the common sense to use his gun to force Indy to hand over the Antikythera. I'm very much a toothpaste and then, bam, orange juice kind of guy. So I'm just gonna go ahead and spoil the plot twist that not only is Mads Mikkelsen not dead, but he doesn't even have so much as a scar from taking a metal beam directly to the face at 60 miles an hour after falling off an 80-foot bridge. Which I have to say ranks pretty high on the list for biggest loads of horseshit in cinematic history. However, this then brings up a number of questions and issues with the Antikythera. How do the both of them plan on recovering the dial, and more importantly, why was Indy so willing to give up a rare artifact to a Nazi scientist in the first place?
Empty-handed? Not exactly.
Archimedes' dial.
Well, half of it.
Yeah, turns out CG Indy pulled some off-screen sleight-of-hand ass hattery, because the people responsible for turning this script into Swiss cheese surprisingly realized they couldn't have him do something so staunchly against his character, but were also too lazy to put in the effort of showing how he managed to pull that trick off. Or maybe there just simply wasn't enough room in the budget to have the VFX artist edit that in. Either way, while this beginning sequence is without question the most tolerable section compared to the rest of the film, it is also the most unnecessary. You could cut the first 20 minutes out and it would ultimately have no effect on the plot. Officer Dipshit isn't the overarching villain, the Antikythera would still be the main MacGuffin, and Mads Mikkelsen's back history, so to speak, is not only irrelevant to the plot, but also heavily conflicts with it. In fact, I think introducing him at a later point would have added a bit more intrigue to his character. A notable and accomplished scientist hiding a sinister ambition beneath the surface, with seemingly unclear motives at first glance that steadily unravel throughout the course of the story. But no, instead we immediately know what Voller wants straight out of the gate. Which then has us pivoting to Old Man Indy waking up at his apartment. It's the 1960s and he lives a sad, miserable life. We learn that Marion has divorced him, he's no longer an associate dean, and that both Indy and his students are completely disinterested in his lectures. Because apparently we have to continue this tired-out trend of having a character over the age of 40 being a complete nihilistic loser who has to rediscover themselves. And as the audience, we basically have to infer Indy's family falling apart is what led him to fall out of love with his life's work. Because it's not made all that clear why Indy was demoted or resigned from his position as Marshal in the first place and has dropped off so massively in his career. If you're going to present viewers with such an extreme disconnect from Crystal Skull, then I feel more context needs to be given as to why everything has played out the way that it has. But Fleabag suddenly barges her way into the scene to show everyone just how amazing and big-brained she is.
Was its most famous resident, who was... Come on, guys, this is on the final.
Archimedes,
Archimedes, who was
a mathematician.
mathematician.
But more than that, an inventor. What physical, irrefutable archaeological evidence is there of these inventions?
The Antikythera.
There it is! There it is!
Needless to say, her character follows the same horrid Disney model of having all the charm and subtlety of a megaphone, because this film constantly feels the need to remind you every 30 seconds that she is very much a modern-day archetype that's been forcefully injected into the 1960s.
I don't need morality lessons from an aging grave robber. I mean, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient.
You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism.
Shut up! Will you shut up?
But Indy's lecture suddenly gets interrupted by some students wheeling in a TV showing a news broadcast of the moon landing. Once again, Pyle driving the point that his place in the world, along with his life's work, has become further overshadowed by the advancements of modern technology. Quite a powerful theme that never gets brought up again throughout the rest of the film.
Good job.
However, we then cut away to Indy's co-workers throwing him a surprise retirement party. A major contrast to the previous scene because, unlike his students, it seems like his colleagues actually seem to appreciate him, even going as far to gift him with a clock, which maybe isn't the most appropriate retirement present, but there is clearly some sentiment behind it at the very least. Where upon receiving it, he immediately gives it away to some nearby homeless person. And so, with nothing else in his life to provide him meaning, he walks across the street to drink his troubles away alone. Or seemingly alone anyways, because Fleabag once again turns up and reveals that she's Basil's daughter, subsequently making her his goddaughter, which he weirdly accepts on face value despite not recognizing her at all, but hey, maybe he's able to verify that during an off-screen conversation. That's a writing technique this movie has to rely on quite a bit. Though their catching up gets shelved for the time being, where we're then presented with the scene of a bellhop delivering a meal to Voller.
Schmidt is in there, and he don't eat anything on wheels, so put it on a table.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
The fuck you mean he doesn't eat anything on wheels? Will Voller have an epileptic fit if he sees that his food was delivered on wheels? He's obviously not just going to leave the cart in here, so I have zero clue why you would feel the need to say something so bafflingly stupid. But following that clunky line, that same idiot informs the bellhop that Voller is the one responsible for designing the rocket for the Apollo 11 mission, highlighting that he is securely under the protection and arguably has the US government firmly in his clutches. Or I'd assume that to be the case anyway, considering how reluctant the CIA are to apprehend him after his goons murder a couple of civilians. But you know that old adage about bridges and crossing them. Regardless, Voller then proceeds to drop some not-so-subtle racist remarks, which kind of begs the question of how he's managed to hide how much of a staunch Nazi he is from the general public for over 20 years, especially when he goes around casually making comments like this.
You didn't win the war. Hitler lost it.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Alright, what gives? I would expect this type of garbage from some no-name who used ChatGPT to bullshit up a script, not a writing staff consisting of people who helped make Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible, Ford v Ferrari, and Logan. I know we're dealing with Disney Lucasfilm and everything, but seriously, what the hell happened? Did you all collectively have a stroke in the writer's room? How is the dialogue this piss? In order for Hitler to have lost the war, that means the Allies would have had to have won the war, which they obviously did, and Voller would have had to have accepted this by now, since he's been working with the federal government for the past 20 years. Whoever is responsible for having this line rear its ugly head in this film needs to be shamed relentlessly.
Shame! Shame!
And since we're still on the topic of piss dialogue, we then jump back over to Indy and Fleabag chatting about the Antikythera.
Apple didn't fall far.
Well, now I'm researching a doctorate. The Archimedes dial, the Antikythera, went through this mountain pass, and then here, it's the only river on the route.
Right.
Under a bridge.
What were you thinking exactly?
We could go there. And I'd become famous. A fated archaeologist. And you, a final triumph. Indiana Jones, out with a bang, back in the saddle.
Woman, he is barely able to stay conscious during this conversation. What makes you think that he's capable of hopping back in the saddle? And her trying to sell him on the prospect of going on another adventure makes zero sense, considering it's revealed later on that she was already aware that Indy had the dial. Why not just ask him directly if she can see the Antikythera?
I like your plan, except it sucks.
But while Indy is taking Fleabag over to the university to show her the Dial of Disappointment, we then jump over to CIA lady having a chat with her boss, where we discover that the US government is helping Voller and his goons apprehend Fleabag and the Dial. Why they would agree to help them, I have no goddamn idea, since the CIA make it quite clear that the US has already gotten what they've needed out of Voller.
You put them on the moon. They got what they wanted.
So it's still a bit murky why the feds would go to all this effort of humoring a Nazi, who is very outspoken about just how much of a Nazi he is, let alone allowing him to hire his own guards for this mission. But while searching through Indy's office, our gaggle of morons run into a bit of a snag.
Professor Plimpton?
Ma'am?
Professor Plimpton?
Ma'am?
Drop your weapon. What the hell are you doing?
No witnesses.
You are nothing but unorganized, grabastic pieces of amphibian shit.
Yeah, this entire operation should just be over. They've gunned down 2 civilians during broad daylight in a public college. CIA lady should be apprehending these goons and informing her superior that Voller instructed them to go against their protocol. Also, no witnesses? Motherfucker, you are rummaging through an active workplace in the middle of New York City. What possibly led you, or Voller for that matter, to believe that you could pull this off without getting spotted by anyone? And I guess this bitch didn't have an alias or fake credentials for them to use as cover? Keep in mind, she is an operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. Why would this have not been a scenario she prepped for? I'm confused as to what the nature of their arrangement is exactly, because the 3 of them are supposed to be functioning as a team, but yet they all seem to have completely different end goals and allegiances. In fact, the only thing this should accomplish for Voller in the end is getting put on the CIA's shit list. While all this is going on though, we then get an official explanation as to why the dial is so important.
Basil became obsessed by this German theory. Conjecture, really. Your father thought this thing could predict fissures in time.
Fissures in time? You're meaning to tell me that our brilliant marksman Basil here looked over an artifact that was originally believed to chart irregularities of planet rotations to help navigate ships, and concluded that the markings on the dial actually represent tears in reality based on what exactly? Did Archimedes experience some crazy cataclysmic event and detail it in his notes? Or did Basil just accept the theory of some rando German scientist purely on face value? Either way, we'll never truly be able to know because the script never bothers to go into detail about any of that. But let's entertain this drug-fueled idea that the Antikythera can detect fissures in time. That would mean that Archimedes figured out a way to predict disturbances in time before they ever actually happened, based purely on the irregular rotations and positioning of planets. Okay, so in that event, why hasn't anyone over the past 2,000 years made the same discovery? I guess no one during that amount of time ever got around to observing the positioning and rotations of planets in our solar system. Archimedes was the only asshole. And furthermore, why is Voller so dead set on getting the half of the dial Indy has, when it's presumed that he's already studied it extensively? It was established that the dial itself doesn't possess any supernatural qualities. It's simply a tool of mathematics that calculates when and where time fissures are going to take place. So all Voller has to do is find and study the other missing half. I mean, this is the very same guy who apparently is responsible for putting the astronauts on the moon now. So I can't imagine it would take him that long to chart out the Antikythera onto paper or just make a recreation. However, it's revealed that Fleabag actually did know that Indy had the dialysis of Disney this whole time and decides to run off with it.
Sorry.
Helena!
Captain Jones.
The only reason Helena is technically considered to be a protagonist is because the writers adamantly insist on attaching that label to her. The script tries to cement her place in the film as being a bouncy, lovable thief with a heart of gold, which wouldn't be a problem if she wasn't constantly doing things at every turn that establish her to be an irredeemable paste-eating lunatic. She's just swindled Indy into showing her the Antikythera so that she could run off with it to sell on the black market, and locked him in a room with armed Nazis who, for all she knows, might kill him on the spot. Fleabag is willing to risk leaving her godfather for dead/torture, all for a fat payout.
Lady, you are evil!
But CIA lady then tries calming Indy down by assuring him that they aren't going to harm him, which is a rather bold strategy since she watched both of her thugs gun down random civvies for no reason whatsoever and then proceeded to do dick all about it. Plus, they know that Helena has the dial. She should be their main and really only priority. But Indy manages to evade the CIA/Nazis temporarily by pulling this trick out of his ass. Now I know this movie takes place in a crazy upside-down universe where cause and effect has basically been tossed into a wood chipper, but elderly people are typically not known for taking falls well, and when you factor in that Indy is supposed to be 70 years old at this point, I refuse to believe that he would be able to casually shrug that bullshit off and outmaneuver the CIA in order to make a phone call to the local police. Though before he's able to reveal too much information, the CIA cut him off and throw Indy in the back of a service truck. All of them then have a brief chat about the dial, which ultimately ends up going nowhere, partly due to Indy never bothering to ask CIA lady why they're after the dial, but also because their conversation gets interrupted by some absolute grade A asshattery.
Whoa, where do you think you're going? We got a parade going on.
Shut up.
I can't go this way. Gotta go back.
Hell no. What is wrong with you, man? What the hell were you thinking? Walk, come on. What are your problems? You don't look when you backing up? Take care of that guy.
What in the absolute hell are you all doing? You are the CIA. Just force the taxi driver to move his cab out of the way. What is happening right now? You turbocharged morons couldn't drive forward, so your backup plan consists of ditching your getaway vehicle and escorting your asset on foot in the opposite direction of a crowded anti-war protest? I can't imagine how this would give Indy the perfect opportunity to escape.
No witnesses. No witnesses.
No witnesses.
Anyways, we're then presented with a ham-fisted John Wick 3 horse chase sequence across New York City, because per usual, Disney Lucasfilm are practically allergic to showing an original idea on screen. And surprisingly, Indy manages to outrun Voeller's thugs despite one of them being on a damn motorcycle that he could have used at any point to knock an elderly man off his horse with. I'm sure there are those of you in the back who think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but the problem is that supposed molehill has drastic story implications that only plays out the way that it does because Boyd Holbrook's character is the type that would somehow manage to get himself locked inside his own car, which in turn chokes out any potential for competent characterization to take place across the board because Indy doesn't escape due to resourcefully using his knowledge and familiarity of the city. He's just insanely lucky that this world and the people who are chasing him are operating in the way that they are. This encounter could have played out 80 million different ways given that it was set in New York City, but yet Lucasfilm doubled down on the one that made the least amount of sense possible. Now I want to take a quick second to zoom out and cover everything that has happened so far plot-wise. We're shown a flashback that reveals what the main MacGuffin of the movie is, which really could have been cut out because we learn about the dial shortly afterwards anyways, followed by Indy showing Fleabag the dial, which results with Fleabag stealing the dial, where Indy then has to run away from the Feds/Nazis because they're after him too now for some reason. All of this has taken up over 45 minutes of the runtime. The sense of progression feels so artificially bogged down, almost as if the movie was specifically designed to exist on a certain streaming service to rack up watch minutes rather than actually delivering a cohesive narrative. It gives off the illusion of having substance, but in truth, the world building, plot, and character work is flimsy at best and utterly horrific at worst. And that problem only continues to get worse because it's revealed that the CIA have framed Indiana Jones for murder, which is phenomenally stupid since it would have been way easier for them to throw Voeller's lackeys under the bus considering they were the ones who actually did it and aren't even CIA agents.
You're CIA.
Oh, not me, man. I don't take government jobs.
But whatever, I guess. Let's just make an enemy out of the guy who's helped the US government repeatedly. Now I could maybe, and that's a rather big maybe, look past all of this if Indy being wanted for murder had any relevance or lasting impact on the narrative. But that's the thing, it doesn't at all. There didn't need to be some external force putting pressure on him to leave the country. Indiana Jones would clearly not be content with his goddaughter stealing an ancient artifact to sell on the black market. Though as Indy is fixing to get discovered, we're then presented with a surprise cameo appearance.
No, hey, go home, pal.
This is the guy! It's the killer!
Sorry I'm late, Indy.
For about 2 seconds, I was ecstatic that we'd finally have some form of respite from the dourness of this film, until reality quickly settled back in that the goblins responsible for making this crime against humanity were about to sacrifice Sala on the altar of modern Disney consumerism. But he briefly gives an exposition dump on where and who Fleabag plans on selling the dial to before taking Indy over to the airport.
I also brought my passport. I could help you. I miss the desert. I miss the sea. And I miss waking up every morning wondering what wonderful adventure the new day will bring to us.
Give 'em hell, Indiana Jones!
Here we have what could have been the most meaningful moment in the entire movie completely shot down in flames by mandated MCU humor. Sala still clings to the things that he has left to cherish, his family and his friends, And he's reaching out to Indy, the person he's been through thick and thin with, because he realizes that they both reached the point where life stops giving them things and starts taking them away. That the life he once had in Cairo is a closed chapter and that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. But he's been presented with the chance to help clear Indy's name, and Salah's absolutely willing to brush off his boots to go on one last adventure before having to hang them up for good. Because he doesn't just miss the desert, he doesn't just miss the sea, he misses being out there with his friend. It speaks volumes to what he values and his moral character, but yet he's sidelined for some rando that utterly despises his friend. All because this shriveled up gemsock pretending to be Indiana Jones told him no, despite Salah going to great lengths to give him everything he needs to jump back in the saddle again. But the torture doesn't end there, because for some reason still unknown to me, we immediately transition to a flashback scene of Basil refusing to give Indy the Antikythera unless he promises to destroy it. I'm not entirely sure why Basil would assume Indy would ever agree to that, since preserving history is kind of his whole thing, and the fact that they've gone on whole escapades together to accomplish that very task. Not to mention that destroying the dial wouldn't really do anything, because the Antikythera itself doesn't possess any mystical qualities. Sooner or later, someone is inevitably going to make the same discovery that Archimedes did, either by studying the irregular rotation of planets, or just by sheer dumb luck. Because time fissures can apparently occur anywhere and at any time across the planet. But regardless, the main thing we're supposed to draw from this flashback is that Fleabag blames Indy for why the dial turned her dad into this universe's equivalent of Gollum. Which is a pretty cataclysmically stupid read for current-day Fleabag to pull from that whole situation, because Indy was the only person who even bothered to help her father get to a better mental state by removing the thing that was driving him crazy out of his reach. There's been an attempt to lay out some form of justification for why Fleabag was totally in the right to throw Indy to the wolves, but the only thing this flashback accomplishes is painting her in an even worse light. But jumping back to the present though, Indy lands in Tangier and makes his way over to the hotel where Helena is auctioning the dial at, where we're then introduced to Discount Shorty. He's super into planes, which is totally a random tidbit about him as a character, and not a massively integral part of the plot at all. In fact, there really isn't much to say about him other than that, because we're never really shown a similar dynamic between Fleabag and Teddy like Indy had with Short Round and Temple of Doom. Teddy, more or less, just kind of hangs around and occasionally pickpockets people when the feeling strikes him. Sure, he and Fleabag get along alright, I guess, but they don't ever really banter or joke with one another or reach some deeper understanding by having to rely on each other during a life-threatening moment. He's mainly just along for the ride until he has to facilitate certain plot events. Actually, the more I think about it, all of this kind of makes Short Round's absence even more glaring, because not only is Ke Huy Quan capable of delivering genuine comedic relief that this film desperately needs,
and the Wright brothers were born during the Civil War.
Oh, I thought maybe you went to school with them.
Oh, come on, Indy. That was funny.
Please clap.
But it would also allow Indy to fill more of the resourceful mentor role while having Shorty take on the bulk of the action sequences. So I guess the million-dollar question here is, why the hell is he not in this movie, James?
The only person we follow through the whole way is Indy himself, joined by Helena, and I felt like we needed to have a female lead who challenged him. But we looked at all these different things and tried to figure how they would work. I just didn't want another adult along for the ride.
Getting back on track though, Indy pushes Teddy aside because for some unfathomably stupid reason, Fleabag wanted a 13-year-old kid guarding the entrance of an illegal high roller auction as opposed to the security she's paid off.
I wouldn't do that.
You want to explain it to the cops at the bar.
The ones I paid off. You're out of your depth, Jonesy.
A fat lot of good it did you. They just let an elderly man waltz right in with practically zero effort. Maybe you'd get better results by having someone taller than 5'3" and who's also currently not trying to fly a cardboard plane guarding the entrance.
Jones. He thinks I'm the criminal. He's the one wanted for murder. Nice big picture in the New York Herald. 1:30.
Are you actively trying to speedrun your way into being the most hated character in this movie? Here's the thing, Helena. Innocent people are dead because of this dial. People that might very well have lived had you decided to not go looking for it. The fact that you have absolutely no remorse, or even a tinge of sympathy for those who were mercilessly gunned down, also that you can make a buck, is already damning in itself. But to laugh in Indy's face that he's been framed for murder and refuse to corroborate his alibi is some complete deranged scumfuck shit. It's something that a villain would do.
This relic is my property.
It's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Openly admitting to having committed a crime to a room full of people is not a witty dig against capitalism, no matter how hard you believe it to be. I swear to God, every time this brainlet speaks, the script further douses itself in jet fuel. But following that awkward excuse for dialogue, Voller and his goons take off with the dial, resulting in another horrendously structured and drawn-out action scene that eventually leads our protags getting stopped by the Moroccan Mafia.
My father woke me. He told me you'd return to our hotel.
What exactly do you owe this guy?
Just some bail money and a lifetime of happiness.
I presume you sold the ring?
It didn't go for as much as I thought it would.
Let me get this straight. Fleabag decided to go behind Voller's back so that she could hawk this 2,000-year-old Greek artifact at the hotel owned by her ex-fiancé's mobster family, who currently want her dead because she's stolen money from them.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Was she seriously under the delusion that no one at the hotel would try to contact Raheem? There was literally nowhere else she could have auctioned off the dial?
How embarrassing.
As the both of them are running away from the mobsters, Fleabag proceeds to drop this banger of a line.
Well, I'm not the one that's engaged to a mobster!
I don't need morality lessons from an aging grave robber!
Indy has saved a village of children from crazy mind control voodoo magic. He fought in World War II. He's preserved history time and time again by stopping the Nazis from disrupting the natural balance of the world. Nor should we gloss over that he saved your father's life and seemed to be the only person who gave a shit about improving his mental state after the fact. Indy's facilitated far more good in the world than you could ever dream of achieving. So yeah, I'd say he's the perfect person to give morality lessons on why you should stop being such a sleazy parasite. All of that aside, their conversation then carries over into the chase scene.
How did you end up like this?
I mean, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
I'm sorry, resourceful, self-sufficient? The reason the Moroccan Mafia was even alerted is because you tried to auction off the dial at the hotel they own. Had Indy not shown up, you'd most likely have been decapitated with a scimitar. Quite the shame that one is.
And I felt like we needed to have a female lead who challenged him.
Marion absolutely was that character. But the thing is, Raiders, or even Crystal Skull for that matter, had to have her tell the audience what her qualities were. They were evident based on her actions and interactions conveyed across those respective films, by the lengths she would go to protect what's hers and those she cares for. There's way more nuance and depth attached to Marion lashing out towards Indy in order to prevent herself from growing too close to him because she doesn't want their relationship, something that once meant the entire world to her, to be ripped away again. As opposed to Fleabag constantly making excuses about why it's okay for her to screw people over for money.
The only thing worth believing in ever is cash.
What a joke.
Moving on though, Voller and his thugs manage to escape with the dial but end up rolling into the CIA. Wait a minute, the feds were in Tangier this whole goddamn time? They just let Voller create another international incident when they could have been posted up in the hotel to help the local authorities take down an entire criminal enterprise. For an Indiana Jones entry that tries to play up the whole Operation Paperclip political intrigue angle, it has virtually no effect on anything, even during moments where it definitely should. It kills off any potential for substantial world building to take place, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible.
No witnesses.
Well, CIA lady, you died as you lived. Utterly useless and pathetic. I legitimately don't think I've ever come across a more extreme example of villains in a movie or show being so self-aware that cause and effect is just not a thing in this universe. That they can deadass kill a federal agent and hijack a military helicopter with zero repercussions. And none of the feds on board this plane bothered to entertain the idea of handcuffing any of them. They're totally fine with having these unhinged lunatics freely walking around.
You know, I'm something of a dumbass myself.
But following all of that bullshit, we then cut back to our merry band of morons.
I'm wanted for murder. Nazis have half of Archimedes' dial and your father's notebooks.
I have a copy.
Where? You memorized 5 notebooks.
7, and of course not. Half of them were as dull as ditch water. Just a really important bit.
Congratulations on having a near photographic memory, I guess, But that wasn't the point Indy was making. The point is that the Nazis have half the dial, they have your father's notes, and considering all that's needed to acquire the Graphicos is to do about 3 minutes worth of scuba diving, there really shouldn't be anything preventing them from reaching the other half of the dial before the three of you. You've helped facilitate Voeller's crazy time travel scheme, all because you were dead set on getting your fat bag of cash. Your greed has caused irreparable harm, and you don't seem to give a remote damn about any of it.
The location of the Graphicos?
Nobody knows where the Graphicos is.
Dad did.
Ask her if she knows what language it's in.
Ah, it isn't in a language, it's in a code.
What code?
Archimedes used 2 codes, linear B and Polybius square.
So even if you find the Graphicos without me, you can't read it.
Please.
What if it's linear B?
50 quid, it's Polybius.
The fact that Indy is being forced to prove his usefulness to Fleabag of all people, when he had to save her from getting whacked from the Moroccan Mafia, all because she was too much of a knobhead to consider selling the dial anywhere else, is absolutely disgusting. Naturally, this is by design, because while Indy's name might be prominently featured in the title card, this is ultimately not his film, because no room can be spared for anyone in the story other than Helena. It's why, despite her many and rather egregious qualities, the writers have to repeatedly pound into submission that she is the one constantly in the right. However, the three of them need a boat in order to find the Graphicos, because Archimedes, who went to all the effort of splitting the Antikythera into 2 pieces so that the Romans wouldn't be able to find the dial, also left a detailed map of the locations for both halves so that Indy Rando could go find them. It makes total sense if you just don't think about it.
Dad tracked down the old sponge diver who found the dial. That's where they found it. But he said that most of the ship had broken off and sunk to the ocean floor.
Oh, so then a diving team has probably already found the Graphicos? Seeing as the Antikythera was discovered in 1901 and that it is now 1969? No one over the course of 68 years thought, hey, maybe there's more valuable shit to find around here, and decided to come back with better equipment? They just stopped after uncovering half of an ancient Greek artifact.
I'm a kind of, as you know me, I'm kind of a brainiac academic about movies.
Liar!
But unfortunately, all of this gets carried over into what has to be the most painful exchange in this entire waterboard torture session of a movie.
You remember seeing any dates in your father's notebooks?
What date?
These dates. August 20th, 1969, that's 3 days from now. And the same date in 1939, 2 weeks before Hitler invades Poland.
Oh, wait. Now you believe the dial has magical powers?
I don't believe in magic, Wombat. But a few times in my life I've seen things I can't explain. And I've come to believe it's not so much what you believe, as how hard you believe it.
Have you gone completely senile? You watched the Ark of the Covenant melt a dude's face off. An Indian kid tortured you with voodoo. The Holy Grail saved your father from dying in the Last Crusade. You are the last person in this universe I would ever expect to not believe in magic. But even if we discarded all of that, what exactly is the message behind believing hard enough in the dial? It's a mechanical device. They both know who invented the Antikythera. It's not an incomprehensible relic of divine power or origin. So why the hell is it being constantly treated as one? And the even crazier thing is, the Spear of Longinus would have fit way more in line with the message that I'm assuming they were trying to get across here, about the significance faith plays in this universe, and highlighting the dangers of delving in forces or powers beyond one's comprehension, because it will inevitably lead to ruin. But instead, the writers decided to use a non-supernatural MacGuffin that historically has never been steeped in any form of myth or established legend, as a vehicle for our character, who apparently doesn't believe magic exists, to point out the power of belief.
Good job.
The message that they should have gone with, if they absolutely had to have it be linked to the dial, is that Indy finds himself in a race against time, with the little amount of time that he has left on this earth, to preserve history by stopping the Nazis from altering the very course of it. And after a rather long, chaotic string of events, he's finally been given a moment to reflect on that, maybe coming to the realization that even in the twilight years of his life, the world does in fact still have a need for someone like him, and that it always will. It's not completely in the spirit of what you typically get from an Indiana Jones movie, but there is a consistent through line at the very least.
The only thing worth believing in ever is cash.
Are you even capable of pretending to not be a complete psychopath for 5 seconds? Like, I get it, you have a hard-on for screwing people out of their money, but it doesn't concern you at all that the Nazis are after the dial that your father theorized is capable of detecting fissures in time, or that the world would be significantly better off had you not bothered to go looking for it? And the implication that Fleabag's whole arc is her admitting deep down that she's actually a pretty good person doesn't really work, considering she straight up laughed in Indy's face that he's wanted for murder and isn't all that shy about manipulating people for her sole benefit.
What if you could go back in time? What would you do?
I'd stop my son from enlisting.
Did he sign up to please you?
No, he signed up to piss me off.
How would you have stopped him?
I'd tell him he was gonna die. I'd tell him that his mother would find no end to her grief, and that his father would be helpless to console her, and that the loss would put an end to their marriage.
This easily would have been my favorite moment in the entire movie, just based on how much effort Harrison Ford put into selling the emotional weight of this scene, but it all completely crumbles apart when put under the slightest bit of scrutiny. Mutt, the rebellious, headstrong motorcycle fanatic who doesn't listen to authority, enlisted in Vietnam to piss off Indy, the man who willingly fought, bled, and nearly died for his country. Numerous times. The man who has fought communists.
I like Ike.
If anything, the entire scenario should be completely flipped. Indy should want his son to go off to Vietnam, and Mutt refusing to enlist or going as far to dodge the draft. The fact is, Mutt should still be alive. The only reason he isn't is because James Mangold and/or the studio wanted him dead, resulting in Mutt getting hardcore character assassinated off-screen, all for an emotional payoff that makes zero sense.
You're still wearing the ring.
I can't take it anymore! I just want to die!
Has the thought ever occurred in that smooth, caveman-ass brain of yours that Indy is wearing the ring because he doesn't want to be separated from his wife? I'm sure empathizing with others is hard for you since you're actually one of those aliens from Crystal Skull in human disguise, but high-fiving yourself over in the corner about how much of an insufferable asshole you are isn't endearing or cute. It just makes you profoundly stupid. And speaking of profoundly stupid things, that perfectly ties into what's about to happen next. So the following morning, Indy, Fleabag, and Frogman are able to retrieve the Graphicos during their 3-minute scuba dive, only to return to the surface to discover that Voller and his thugs have killed everyone on board. Because I guess Indy never bothered with warning Antonio Banderas that they might have to deal with trigger-happy Nazis, since they also know the location of the Graphicos. Oh right, I almost forgot to mention, Antonio Banderas is in this film, by the way. Oh, and there he goes. I don't think a marketing run with Antonio Banderas would have necessarily prevented Dial of Dismemberment from being the massive financial flop it ended up being, but I mean, hell, it couldn't have hurt, right? I mean, why waste all that money getting him on board the project, only to kill him off almost immediately and barely feature him in the movie poster? But I do have to give credit where credit is due. His death did accomplish something. Indy now officially has blood on his hands, all because he refused to tell his friends that he decided to put them in imminent danger. So that's cool, I guess. Anyways, Fleabag, being the spineless weasel that she is, agrees to decipher the Graphicos for Voller, but while doing so begins to search around the cabin for a stick of dynamite. Wait, a fucking stick of dynamite? This was your master plan? Hoping Voller would give you his cigarette and that you miraculously wouldn't end up killing yourself? Also, I'm not an expert when it comes to explosives, or boats for that matter, but I am 99% certain that if you light a full stick of dynamite in the cabin of a ship, that bitch is sinking and everyone within the blast radius would be dead.
When you're in a tight spot, dynamite.
My friend was just murdered.
While I am savoring the only moment in this entire film that actually forces Fleabag to respond to the fact that people are dead because of her and that she's behaving like a depraved psycho, it still ultimately goes nowhere because she then immediately tries to rationalize to Indy why she's translated the Graphicos to the Nazis.
You told them everything.
Word for word. But Archimedes didn't make it that easy. The tomb isn't in Alexandria.
Bolivia's square.
NATO?
Wax and wood.
Anything else?
It's heavy. Too heavy.
Well, I guess we can't hold it too much against her then, because it was a false code. Never mind that she couldn't have known or even suspected that when offering to decipher the Graphicos for Voller before ever having picked it up, meaning that had Fleabag not gotten insanely lucky that the Graphicos was encased in wax, she would have given the Nazis the exact location of the other half of the dial. Not to mention that she still ends up luring Voller to the other half anyways, because she didn't take into consideration that Nazis have eyeballs.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Either way, the actual code of the Graphicos reveals that the rest of the Dial of Disease is in the year of Dionysius, a tourist attraction that gets thousands of visitors every year and has been thoroughly explored. That is where the other half of our super secret time fissure detecting MacGuffin is. Amazing stuff. However, within 10 minutes of them landing in Sicily, Discount Short Round wanders off to get an ice cream and immediately gets kidnapped by Voller. No, I am not shitting you, this is supposed to be what kicks off the final act of the plot. They don't even stick around and try to grab all three of them. Voller just assumes that Discount Shorty has all the info they need and drive off in a van, leaving Indy and Fleabag to have to hijack a nearby Fiat.
They're not gonna hurt him. They're gonna use him to get the other half of the dial.
They mercilessly murdered your friend and his entire crew. Voller's thugs have openly gunned down your coworkers simply for having seen them searching through your office. There is an extraordinarily high chance that they're going to hurt him, especially once they've gotten the other half of the dial. And frankly, I'm confused as to why you're so convinced they won't, given your other past encounters with Nazis. What I'm even more confused by, though, is how the both of them were able to get to the ear of Dionysius before Voller. It'd be one thing if they had to pry that information out of Teddy, but seeing as he shares Fleabag's same motivation of being purely money-driven, I can't imagine he wouldn't have given it to them on the spot. I think it's more than safe to say that the people responsible for making this monstrosity are completely clueless with how time works, because after Indy and Fleabag make their way through a puzzle room, and I am using that term very generously, they stumble upon Archimedes' tomb.
This phoenix has propellers.
Clocks won't be invented for 1,000 years.
Archimedes used it.
Oh my god, who could have ever imagined that Archimedes figured out how time travel works? Except for that one time during the opening flashback when Voller heavily insisted that he had. Or that other time when Basil wanted Indy to destroy the dial because he thought it was capable of detecting fissures in time. Or in that scene where Indy claimed that he didn't believe in magic but that he believed hard enough in the dial. Whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. It's almost hilarious that this movie has the balls to treat this as some grand reveal, when the writing on the wall couldn't have been any more obvious. Of course, this is a Pandora's box of issues when it comes to Archimedes being buried with something that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years, but the logic used to justify that is so ass-backwards and complicates so much that it'll be easier to tackle toward the end of the video. Though much to no one's surprise, Voller turns up and holds a gun to Fleabag's head, demanding that Indy hand over the other half of the dial.
Thank you. History's greatest moment. Its end.
That line would actually work if Voller's main goal is to enact some type of apocalyptic nuclear winter or something, but as far as I can tell, it isn't at all. So it's a really weird thing for him to say. I'm almost convinced Matt Mikkelsen was given a list of random one-liners to spout off that don't sound completely awful in isolation, but in context with what's happening on screen fall incredibly short. But Teddy proceeds to self-attack Mr. No Witnesses, which causes a gunfight to break out. While pinned down, Indy then tells Fleabag to get Teddy out of there, but before he's able to escape with them, he ends up getting shot. Which, not going to lie, I was actually pretty surprised that Fleabag attempts to feel bad about this, when she literally wanted him dead almost an hour ago.
Tell him to back off.
I just told him to shoot you.
You could maybe argue that she was moved that he would give up the dial to spare her life, but the thing is, Indy was sort of forced to hand over the dial either way because he would have been next. Not that it really prevented him from getting shot in the end anyways, but as we have learned from Dial of Destruction, shit that is supposed to kill people often just doesn't in this clown world. Which leads us to Voller sparing and kidnapping Indy. I'm pretty clueless as to why he does, frankly, since they don't need him for what they have planned, and there's no incentive to reveal said plan to Indy, but he still does so all the same.
Who are you gonna kill to win the war?
In a few minutes, with the help of Archimedes, we shall fly into the eye of the storm on August 20th, 1939. My quarry will be waiting for me at 16 Prinzregentenplatz for an update on his V1 rocket.
What kind of Nazi kills the Führer
The kind that believes in victory, Dr. Jones.
Why is it that in the 2000th and 23rd year of our Lord, that there are people who are still employed at Disney Lucasfilm that actually signed off on having Indiana Jones, the guy who stops Nazis, actively trying to prevent the time traveler from going back into the past to kill Hitler?
No, 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 no!
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
And the whole thing about Voller being an uber-Nazi wanting to assassinate and replace Hitler in order to win World War II is pretty inconsequential, when his plan for accomplishing that is laughably ridiculous, because the only thing his actions would accomplish is getting executed as a traitor, and arguably weakening Nazi Germany even further by creating a massive power vacuum. Nor should we gloss over that Voller's been working with the feds for the past 20 years. He could have devised a scheme to make off with nuclear secrets, advanced weaponry, or hell, even modern-day planes for that matter, to bring back to help with the war effort and to ensure Hitler's success. A simple change like that would have elevated him as an opposing villain, and also not put Indiana Jones in the position of saving Hitler. But no. Voller, a devout Nazi, has confined himself to as narrow of a time window as possible, with as little means possible, to carry out his plan of becoming the Führer by killing Hitler in order to win World War II when he has a device that can, in theory, take him to any point in the past.
You are not the guy. You're not capable of being the guy. I had a guy, but now I don't. You are not the guy.
Then what the hell am I doing here?
I don't know.
You know, Kathy, it becomes more and more difficult for people to believe that modern-day Lucasfilm isn't some glorified, elaborate money laundering operation, when you have repeatedly facilitated the destruction of nearly every single one of George Lucas's intellectual properties with absolute impunity. That your executive decisions as president have resulted in the company hemorrhaging millions of dollars, along with numerous projects getting scrapped, and yet somehow your position isn't under any threat whatsoever. Because if Dial of Destiny accomplished anything, it was eviscerating any shred of doubt that the downfall of Lucasfilm is not merely an accident, or even a coincidence, it is a pattern, one built upon the hell-bent desire to piss all over the very legacy that you inherited.
So it could go on forever. To be perfectly honest, if we have good storytellers, it will go on forever.
How about new?
Now, for those of you who've never witnessed this atrocity to cinema, you're probably under the very reasonable assumption that the bar's been pile-driven down into the Earth's core and that it's simply not possible for this movie to get any more mind-numbingly stupid. Unfortunately, you'd be wrong, because it does in fact get worse. It gets so much worse. As Voller's having his thugs load Indy into a World War II bomber, Fleabag and Discount Shorty arrive at the airstrip and try to work out how they're going to rescue him.
Hey, think you could fly one of those?
Well, I haven't flown a Nord.
You've never flown any plane.
Then why the hell did you ask him if he could? Aren't you supposed to be the resourceful, self-sufficient one in the group? God, I'm about to have an aneurysm. However, Teddy says that he'll go start the plane, and he does so rather easily. Some top-tier character development, that is. I feel like hot wiring an engine and taking off during a storm is vastly different to flying a cardboard cutout. But out of the rest of the bullshit that's about to happen on screen, this is surprisingly the least of this film's problems. There is also a pilot man asleep in the back. I'm not entirely sure why he's sleeping in the plane, or even in this movie for that matter. I mean, Discount Shorty's gotten this far, you might as well just go full throttle with his piloting skills. Though he does help out with an engine stall later on, so for what it's worth, that is something the Dial of Disaster has going for itself. I guess. But cutting back to Indy, as their plane is approaching the time fissure, he turns back to notice some bullets and suitcases vibrating on the hull of the plane. This, somehow, reminds him of
Continental drift! Archimedes didn't know about continental drift. He couldn't have. Your coordinates are based on markers that have been moving for 2,000 years.
Indy, do you think people were living on goddamn Pangea when Archimedes was alive? The continents move about half an inch a year. It's not like they're in radically different positions than they were when the dial was first created. How would being off by a few yards at best result in them going through a portal to a completely different era in history? Also, the time butthole is in the sky. Its location is predicated on astrological positioning, not land movements. Continental drift shouldn't have any effect on Voeller's calculations at all. But for whatever arbitrary reason, the film has decided that this is extremely significant now. In fact, it's actually pretty convenient that Archimedes' incorrect markings on the dial of where he believed the time portal for 1939 was going to appear just so happened to lead to another time fissure and not out in the middle of nowhere. A little too convenient if you ask me. Which we will rip into momentarily, but this still brings up the issue of the existence of portals themselves. If these tears in reality are natural phenomena in this world that can occur anywhere and at any time, then shouldn't this be something pilots have already encountered by now and have to deal with regularly? Shouldn't history constantly be in flux because people can knowingly or unknowingly get sucked into a time butthole? And if it is possible for people to return back to their present after entering those portals, then surely there'd be some form of recorded testimony or evidence of this. One of the reasons why the original trilogy works so well is because it utilized its historical settings, factions, and myths without massively infringing on significant real-world events. Those stories are self-contained pockets of adventure and fantasy taking place in a particular era and time. But Dial of Destiny, on the other hand, drastically alters history because of its insistence on incorporating time travel into its script without ever considering the implications of its use. And to be clear, this isn't an appeal to realism. It's to highlight that this movie is antithetical to the spirit of the originals. Because from this point onwards is where it really devolves into subhuman levels of idiocy. So they fly through the portal, and it in fact does not take them to 1939, it takes them to 214 BC, or aka...
This is the siege of Syracuse. 214 BC, you got the wrong war.
What a crazy plot twist that wasn't horribly foreshadowed in the beginning of a movie about time travel at all. Now you would think at this point that they would immediately be trying to turn around and head back for the portal because there are Roman triremes outside and that it is clearly not 1939. But apparently these are the same Imperial pilots from The Rise of Skywalker who have no idea which direction up is, because they instead decide to fly low enough to where their plane is able to get hit by ballista bolts.
What are you doing? What are you doing, you idiot? Get out of the way! Slide to death!
Holy sweet Christmas, fuck James. What am I watching right now? Did you take shrooms with Boogie in the backwoods of Arkansas before you made this segment? I mean, genuinely, what the fuck am I watching? This movie had a $300 million budget, and has been in production hell for frankly God knows how long at this point. And the absolute best that you could do is Nazis firing LMGs at Roman soldiers.
It just felt like everyone wanted to make a really good movie. It just felt like everyone wanted to make a really good movie.
This relic is my property.
It's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism.
It just felt like everyone wanted to make a really good movie. Honestly, I needed to know what I'm doing, because if I'm making a movie where all I'm doing is trying to make it cool and spectacular, but I don't know what it's about.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like a man in the woods without a compass. I'm kind of a pointless director.
You can say that again, pal.
As the plane is fixing to go down, Indy manages to nab the last parachute and jumps off with Fleabag, eventually landing safely over in a nearby field. She peels away the pack, only for the movie to remember after 20 agonizingly long minutes that Indy has been shot. Which, better late than never, I guess, but it is still pretty damn embarrassing that it's taken this long to address that a 70-year-old man is bleeding out.
You've been shot. You're bleeding. You can't stay here.
I've imagined this Wombat. Studied it.
And if you stay here, you will muck it all up.
The both of you simply being here has already mucked it all up. Mr. No Witnesses gunning down Roman soldiers with a Browning has already mucked it all up. Voeller, along with all the other Nazis dying, has mucked it all up. Leaving behind advanced technology and weapons has already mucked it all up. The ancient Greeks would have most certainly been able to reverse engineer their findings. This should be an unprecedented technological boom for their civilization and fundamentally alter human history, far beyond phoenixes having propellers. Speaking of which, Archimedes wanders over to the wreckage and takes Fuller's watch off his corpse along with the completed dial. And Jesus H. Christ, there truly is no greater travesty to inflict on Mads Mikkelsen's acting career than this extra chromosome-riddled paste guzzler of a villain. His entire place in the plot was to burn to death for the most cataclysmically brain-dead reasons imaginable, all just to have someone steal his shit.
Pathetic.
Anyways, Archimedes spots Indy and Fleabag off in the distance and brings a few of his archers with him, saving both of them from getting shanked by a Roman soldier.
Archimedes.
Ai, Pruketa, soy, Apanthanamoi.
That dial is a forced deck. It doesn't take us anywhere but here.
He built it to get help.
The implication here is that everything that happens during the sequence is all part of a predestined closed loop. Bowler was always supposed to find the dial so that he could use it to go back to 214 BC so that Archimedes would find the watch, which allows him to complete the dial. All of this was going to happen because, in a sense, it already happened. However, there's one teeny tiny issue with that. Historically, Archimedes dies in this siege, so by scaring off the Roman warships, their actions actually are altering the past, which would mean we're not dealing in a bootstrap paradox, but branched timelines.
Well, we just scared off the entire Roman Navy, so I think we've helped enough.
It's not so much a dial of destiny if it's used to rewrite major historical events.
Ironic.
Either way, Indy insists on staying with Archimedes because he believes that the current day has nothing of value to offer him. He has nothing and no one to live for, so he would rather choose to bleed out while watching history unfold, even if it risks altering the very course of it. Although it realistically should already be fundamentally different at this point considering all the crazy drug-fueled fuckery that's just happened. But I digress. This of course massively goes against his character since Indy at his core cherishes history. He's actively fought against people who tried to tamper or subvert it for their own means, and him choosing to stay here would be doing exactly that. We're not just witnessing a physical, but a spiritual death, a bleeding out of all his lifelong endeavors, ideals, and beliefs. And what's worse is that Indy isn't even given the opportunity to come to this realization. Fleabag effectively forces him to do the right thing, when for the vast majority of this movie, she hasn't given a single damn about his well-being, or even doing the right thing for that matter.
I just thought we were in this for all the wrong reasons.
We are.
It was a nice change of pace to have a moment of her not being an insufferable moron, but all of this stems from out of nowhere, and knocking him out removes what little agency Indy had in his own film. Where we then shamelessly cut away to Indy waking up in his bed. Quite a mean right hook Fleabag has. He somehow slept through what should be 2 flights back to New York and the entire trek back to his apartment. I guess getting back into the country with a wanted fugitive isn't that big of a deal after all. But she then walks into the room and the both of them have a chat about what the hell all of that just was.
You should have let me stay.
I couldn't do that.
Why not?
Well, for starters, you'd have changed the course of history.
You flew planes into 3rd century BC ancient Greece. How, in the ever-loving shit, does that not alter the very course of human history? Per usual, we won't ever get an answer to that question because Marion suddenly walks through the door carrying groceries. This is yet another problem that Fleabag has magically fixed because nothing is ever properly set up or earned in this cruel and unusual joke of a sequel. But it turns out that she didn't come back because she heard that Indy had been shot. It's because...
Someone told me you were back. Are you back, Indy?
Which is pretty damn weird because I thought her initial reason for leaving Indy was due to her grief.
Find no end to her grief, and that his father would be helpless to console her, and that the loss would put an end to their marriage.
So Marion either held the death of their son over his head for no real reason at all, or she refused to help Indy get through his bout of depression. And I've gotta be honest, neither option makes her any less shitty of a person. This entire scene is so painfully jumbled and such a blatant reshoot that I'm firmly convinced that this was never the intended ending. That Indy was actually supposed to die in the past, leaving Helena to take over the franchise as India Jones, but some executive stepped in at the last second and pulled the plug, presumably due to how badly the film was projected to flop. And with that, this is the last we will ever see of Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, an icon of cinema whose final chapter won't consist of a triumphant gallop into the sunset, or a reuniting with his long-lost son and marrying the love of his life, or even a celebration of his lifelong endeavors, but instead a betrayal and bastardization of everything he stands for and holds dear. It's why, despite all the efforts to deconstruct the franchise for modern validation, or the amounts of resources Disney Lucasfilm puts towards artificially emulating the character, and will unquestionably continue to do so long after Harrison Ford is dead, it can never amount to the legitimacy and the legacy of what has come before.
Indiana. Hey, lady, you call him Dr. Jones.
My professional name.
I'm kind of a pointless director.